Now to the case at hand. We shall resume our hearing of the case against man. Would the prosecutor, Mr. Phoenix Wright QC, please present the charges against man?
Your Honour, the court today will hear, and the prosecution will submit, that the defendant, man, is guilty of hundreds, if not thousands, of transgressions against others and against God. I submit to you that man has, on a frequent and consistent basis, failed to care about others or about God. In fact, I submit to you that man has at times purposely and actively taken steps to harm and hurt others. Man is inclined in his very nature to commit wrong and to omit right, and he will do so using words, thoughts, or actions. This man who stands on trial here today is guilty, guilty, guilty. He cannot and will not stop his wrongdoings. He has left behind him a mess of hurt, fear, and anger. And the evidence I present to you today will testify to man's trail of destruction. Your Honour, I call to the witness box the victims of man's wrongdoing. Sir, will you please state your name to the court?
Stephen Chan.
Now, Mr. Chan, would you please describe your relationship with the defendant, man?
I went to high school with him, and he was in a few classes of mine.
Okay then, and how would you describe the way that man treated you throughout those high school years?
He wasn't nice to me at all. I mean, when he was alone with me, he was alright. But when he was with his friends, he'd always tease me and make fun of me. He even called me a loser, and I still had no friends.
Now, why do you think he would do that?
I don't know. I guess to make himself feel good, or to impress his friend.
Okay. Now, how did the words that man said to you, how did that make you feel?
Really bad. Like, throughout high school, I had self-esteem issues, and even till today, it's still affecting me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chan. You may step down now. Madam, would you please state your name for the court?
Mrs. Evelyn Wong.
And Mrs. Wong, what is your relationship to the defendant, man?
I am Man's mother. I looked after him and cared for Man throughout his childhood until he became an adult.
And how would you describe Man as a son to you?
Well, I love him, absolutely. He's my son, after all. I will always love him and forgive him, even if he does hurtful things.
But, Mrs. Wong, how did he hurt you?
Well, I suppose he never seemed to appreciate me as his mother. You know, I gladly gave him my all. I made many, many sacrifices. And, you know, I loved him as best as I could. I raised him. Throughout all his school years, I drove him around all the places, giving him lifts to and from places. I woke up early in the morning to make him lunch every single day. I gave up lots of my own comfort so that we could afford to pay for his education, for his games, for his Nerf guns, his iPhones, but I never felt like he really appreciated it, you know. He never really said thank you. He never said it like he meant it, and he would ignore me every time I tried to start a real conversation with him. I guess it does hurt that he never really drew close to me as his mother, even though I do love him so much.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Wong. You may step down. So, would you please state your name to the court?
Mr. Gordon Dukes.
Mr. Dukes, what is your relationship to the defendant, man?
Well, I used to work for Dragonlight Productions, a movie production company.
A movie production company. Sorry, I don't understand. Would you please explain to the court what relevance that has to the defendant, man?
Well, you see, man has downloaded several Dragonlight production movies from the internet illegally to watch on his iPhone.
Now, you said that you used to work for Dragonlight Productions. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, you see, Dragonlight Productions has become less profitable after man and people like him began illegally downloading their movies without paying for them. When a business like Dragonlight Productions, is no longer profitable. They can no longer afford to employ staff. So I lost my job a couple of years ago pretty much because of movie piracy.
I see. Now, what have been the flow-on effects of you losing your job?
Well, it's been hard finding a job in the movie production industry generally because piracy is so widespread. I've been unemployed for a couple of years now. Without the income for a job, we couldn't afford to pay our mortgage, so we had to give up our house. We're now renting an apartment that is less than ideal. It's been really hard on the kids. They've had to change schools a couple of times and have lost contact with friends along the way. The financial stress is starting to get to my wife too. I've noticed that her health hasn't been so good recently. Unfortunately, when I think about it, it's had a pretty widespread impact on our family.
Thank you, Mr. Duke. You may step down now. Your Honour, there are no other witnesses that the prosecution wishes to call to the stand at this time.
What about me? This guy's going to pass me off. Are you serious? You cannot just let this guy.
Order! Order! I will not have an unruly court.
Your Honour, it is abundantly clear from the statements of the three witnesses that man's actions, thoughts and words have had a devastating impact on the lives of many. Whether through bad intentions or mere ignorance, man has been profoundly hurtful to those closest to him, like his mother, as well as to those who have never met man, like Mr. Dukes. It is scary to think that these three witnesses are just a small sample of the countless lives which have been hurt by man's wrongdoing. Man's sins weigh heavily against him, and we haven't even taken into account his sins against God Almighty. It must therefore be clear to this court that man is guilty. Man stands condemned and is therefore deserving of his just punishment, being death. Death is the only punishment fitting for the mountain of sins that have been carried out by the defendant, man.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. The evidence is very clear against man. Mr. Fung, what is the defense? What can possibly excuse him from his wrongdoings against so many people, let alone his wrongdoings against God?